And welcome back to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations with about this Wisconsin Supreme Court election on April 1st. I'm Todd Allbaugh from Civic Media. We are here as our main sponsor. The presenting sponsor of this is UpNorthNews Radio. And of course, one of the founders, Pat Kreitlow, my colleague here, who is on the air every morning from 6 until 8. You are listening to us across the Civic Media Radio Network. This is a live event, and we are down at the beautiful Overture Center here in downtown Madison, as it turns out, right across the street from our world headquarters here. And glad to have you all along. And thanks to everybody who showed up here in person. We are beginning the evening. We have a number of panels throughout the evening, so we're kind of going to reset here. And look at this. We're back from our commercial break, and we have 4 wonderful, fine people. And this part of the panel, this part of the evening, is a panel on public education. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I think this is why Pat was so kind to ask me to moderate it. I grew up in a little town called Richland Center, 5,000 people in southwest Wisconsin. My maternal grandmother started as a farm girl, and my great-grandfather didn't think girls should get an education beyond the 8th grade, and she was a bohemian and didn't think that was really great. And so she left home at 14 and ended up getting not just her high school diploma, but her college degree. And fast forward, she ended up being the first woman to be a dean in the state of Wisconsin at UW-Richland. Marge Wallace was her name. So she was a great woman and a great inspiration in my life. Both my parents, actually, 3, my stepmom, have been teachers now since retired. And my sister and brother-in-law are educators in the D-Eau Claire Public School District. But enough about that. I have a passion for this. That's my point. So I appreciate having all of you here. I'm going to go down the line here. Each of you give us 30 seconds to 1 minute on yourselves. A quick little introduction. Speaking of D-Eau Claire, ladies and gentlemen, here's a guy who started out as kind of a student and activist, and now a freshman representative in the state assembly, the one, the only Christian Phelps, Representative Phelps. Congratulations and welcome.
Todd's brother-in-law was one of my teachers in 7th grade.
Boy, do I feel old.
I'm Christian Phelps, and I was born and raised in Eau Claire. I actually have a lot of extended family in Madison, and I worked in public schools in Wisconsin for 2 years. When I did that, it was the 2 years of my life that I lived in Madison, so familiar with both places. And I have just been really frustrated and mad about the state of affairs and the way that the state treats young people for as long as I can remember. Was 17 when Act 10 was introduced, for example, so my entire adult life has been in this sort of attack on public education world. And so eventually that led me to various different roles, including running for the state assembly last year and being elected in November.
Well, you've lowered the median age considerably. Congratulations. Next up on our panel, Peggy Wirtz-Olsen from WEAC.
Good afternoon, or evening, I guess it is. My name is Peggy Wirtz-Olsen. I am a high school art and English teacher. I grew up in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, so if you're familiar with that part of the state. I am a member of the Marshfield Teachers Association, so Central Wisconsin is my home local. Hey, thanks for applauding for that. And I'm currently serving as the president of the Wisconsin Education Association Council. So I've been teaching for 27 years, so certainly lived changes within the profession in that time, and was active teacher and president of my local union when, as Christian referenced, Act 10 happened here in Wisconsin.
Well, great. Welcome. Thank you for being here. A round of applause. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. Next up, another great organization that I've had the opportunity to be at their events. They do great work, the Wisconsin Public Education Network, and here representing them, Heather DuBois Bourenane.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather DuBois Bourenane. I'm Executive Director of Wisconsin Public Education Network. I am a public school parent and a former educator, and I kind of got radicalized by Scott Walker. And when I was working on my PhD at UW-Madison, was right around the time that Act 10 happened, and you know, this budget busting bill came out that just decimated school funding in this state. And at the same time, I had an outreach job at UW where I was going around to different schools around the state and seeing with my own eyes the disparities, sometimes just blocks apart, between schools that seem to have every resource a kid could need and schools where you couldn't even drink out of the drinking fountains because there was lead in the pipes in the building. And I thought, what? How did this happen here? Who let this occur, and who's doing something about it? And so sort of looking for other people who were as mad as I was, and I found them at Wisconsin Public Education Network, and they were like, we need somebody to get us organized. And I was like, can it be me? And so we've been organizing people all over the state to just kind of tap into that frustration with those disparities and invite people who share our concerns and who agree that every single kid in every single public school deserves equal access to an equally excellent school, should get that. And when the state isn't meeting its obligation, it's up to us to demand they do.
Great. Thank you for being here, Heather. Really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And last but not least, University of Wisconsin, Madison, Professor Emeritus, Julie Mead. Julie?
Yes, hello. My name is Julie Mead. I was born in Edgerton, but don't tell this against me. I was raised in northwestern Illinois, but always close to Wisconsin. I am the product of public education all the way through to my PhD, so it's really, really important to me. I began as a teacher of children who are deaf and hard of hearing, so special education is kind of my thing. In fact, my very first year of teaching was the first year that what is now the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act had to be implemented across the country. And so I have, as a professional, grown up with that law. And so not surprisingly, I began to study that law, and I studied that law in particular, the intersection of programs for disabilities or the rights of kids with disabilities and our burgeoning kinds of school choice. So I have done quite a bit of studying around vouchers and charters. And yes, I am retired from the university, but I'm not retired from advocacy for public education.
Thanks, Julie. Really appreciate it. All right, for those listening on the Civic Media Radio Network, you were listening to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race election, which is, of course, April Fool's, no joking. Be a voter, as my colleague Luke Mathers likes to say. If you want to check your voter registration or to register online, go to myvote.wi.gov. That's myvote.wi.gov. Of all the things you're going to hear tonight, either in person or online, that is it right there. Be a voter and get out, because as our previous people said, that's the only way that we are all going to make a difference together. All right, we got 15 minutes. Kreitlow will have a hook. He'll pull me off of here if I don't keep you to it. So let's get right into it. Let's have a discussion. Julie, let's start with you. Okay. The big question, and anybody can hop in here. People say, Todd, why in the heck should I care about education for a Supreme Court race? What does the Supreme Court have to do from a legal perspective with education?
Well, a lot. And in fact, remember that we're voting for someone who's going to be on that bench for 10 years. So think of all of the things that can come up in a 10-year span. But we have a whole lot of things that are ripe for discussion right now that I think we need to pay attention to. In particular, I think we need to pay attention to that legislative obligation, Christian, to be funding public education, and whether or not our legislators have abdicated that responsibility. And so there's likely, I would guess, maybe not, but we want to have someone on the bench who understands that constitutional obligation and the investment that our grandparents and great-grandparents made when they crafted that constitutional obligation to fund public education so that it would be, as it says, as nearly uniform as practicable. In addition to that, of course, in 2 years, the limits on our voucher programs will expire. And so all of the press that we currently have around school choice and some of the issues in school choice, those are likely to burgeon and become even more pressing for schools and school districts. And so that's an issue that might come up. And then, well, there are a host of others, the revenue limits, the issues of censorship, students' rights, employees' rights. So there are a whole host of things that could come up.
Representative Phelps, let's go to you next, because you can make the argument that you're the benefactor of a new Supreme Court in that this current Supreme Court redid the maps and made them fairer. You're in one of those redistricted districts. But talk for a minute. Democrats have made gains, certainly this last election. You're still in the minority in the legislature. The governor is a Democrat, obviously. But what does it mean to you as a minority member of the Assembly is trying to get something done to have a Supreme Court that's not going to legislate from the bench, but actually interpret laws as written?
Yeah. Good question. I think that the Supreme Court, as one of the three branches of government, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that they are supposed to be a check on ours. I think they were correct to say that the previous legislature, having drawn maps to so heavily advantage their majority, was not right. And so, the D-Eau Claire area actually had some of the biggest change in our legislative maps, and where we used to have no competitive districts, we now have only competitive districts, which is how it should be. And unfortunately, the majority still holds a lot of control. And so I serve on the Assembly Committee on Education. Last session, there were about two-thirds of the Assembly was Republican and one-third was Democratic. And that was the ratio on our committees as well. But I think not many people are aware of the fact that the majority, the Speaker, still sets committee ratios no matter what the body looks like. And this year, the ratio on committees is still two-thirds, one-third, even though we are 54-45 in the body. So we are up against kind of a brick wall as minority members of the committee, where there are 9 Republicans and 4 Democrats. Stopping bills is pretty close to impossible because of the number of Republicans that we would have to get to break with their leader. And I think it's worth mentioning that Julie brings up the constitutional obligation to fund public schools, which I believe we've fallen short of for all the reasons she enumerated. Our committee has already spent 3 full taxpayer-funded days, and so far we have discussed cursive, pronouns, locker rooms, the semantics of our test scores, and not once have we discussed the special ed funding gap, the revenue limits, the voucher program, or the fact that we're $3,500 per student behind the funding levels of 2009. So we need a Supreme Court that's going to check and balance a legislature if it continues to be this bad at meeting our constitutional obligation.
Peggy, I want to go to you. I want to go to you because from an educator's standpoint, as I said, I have family or educators, but talk to us around Wisconsin right now for a moment. As this state has a dearth, a shortage of young people going into education. And people say, why on earth would I want to go to Platteville or Milwaukee or any of our great university schools to go into education when after Act 10, as was talked about before, it's tough right now. So what does this mean having a fair court to an educator?
I think that as an educator, right, a fair court is critically important to the issues that we've all been discussing tonight. One thing that I will lift up is around our students' issues and needs in the classrooms. The educator's ability to teach truth, I think, is something I want to mention tonight. And I also want to mention, that real desire for an educator to be able to make ends meet at the end of the day. So you referenced, going to a university, right, and the bills that come with that, and then classroom, being in a classroom with our students every single day, making sure that the resources our students have are adequate and really meeting the needs of what those students in the classroom have. And at the end of the day, that we're not in this virtuous cycle of one referendum after another in our schools to keep the doors open and the lights on. So all of those issues, and when I think about the students' needs in the room, every student's learning conditions are really the educator's working conditions.
And these folks are dedicated to our kids. Talk for a minute, because I think this is something that goes under talked about. I'm on live radio. I'm not as good a live person as we are on tape. But talk for a second the real impact. Because we hear Act 10, oh, they want more vacation or they want more money. No. Let's talk for a second from an educator's standpoint, real families. Because when Act 10 came in, what individual teachers were paying for health care, for out-of-pocket expenses. And that means educators are paying more. And in many places in our community, one spouse works for a school district and the other spouse is a plumber or an electrician or a baker, or has a child care business in their home. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so dollars and cents, I think, are a piece of what we're talking about tonight, and they're a piece of what is impacting every educator I talk to. Educators who have second and third jobs, and we know the work in the classroom is important in helping our students thrive and that reach, teach, and inspire that every educator wants to do. Is tough to do when you're working that second and third job. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The erosion of healthcare benefits is something I do want to mention tonight that has been an impact, where educators' benefits nowhere even closely match up to the benefits of a part-time legislator like Christian at this point. So every educator wants to see every student in their classroom succeed. The challenge is with going into a profession where you know at the end of the day that may not be the case, is a piece to what we're seeing, what we're facing. I'm going to share one brief story, and that's from a colleague of mine, a 2-educator household who's about to have his first child. Last week, tearfully talked with me about their fear that they're not able to pay for childcare for a new baby in a 2-educator household.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible.
Those are real concerns.
And we listen to Up North News Radio from 6 to 8 every morning with Pat Kreitlow. He does a great job of telling these stories. Unfortunately, that is not a singular story. There are people like that all across Wisconsin. Heather, you're on the show so much with Pat on Up North News Radio. Always appreciate when you come on. One of the things that you bring is this experience of Wisconsin Public Education Network going all over the state. Talk for us just about a second, because we know that our school districts, particularly in places where I'm from, Richland Center, or Ithaca, Wisconsin, a great school district, even smaller than Richland Center, they are our communities. But public education, public school districts have to take all students by law, as it is. Talk to us about what the difference between public districts face versus private districts or voucher districts.
People are often shocked to learn that when they choose to send their child to a private school on a voucher, they give up certain rights and protections for those kids. Private schools are not required, like public schools are, to meet the needs of students with disabilities. They can openly discriminate against students for any reason, and sometimes do. They can use corporal punishment. They do not have to hire licensed teachers. They don't play by the same set of rules, and kids are at risk in these environments, and we should not be using taxpayer dollars to fund any programs that put kids at risk. And so that is a huge issue for folks. The other thing that I think folks don't realize is all the opportunities that democracy already affords us to have a say in our child's education when they attend a public school. You can show up at school board meetings. You can review all curricula. You can have a relationship with your child's educator in ways that are not guaranteed to you if you send your child to a private school. And while people might make those choices for all kinds of very good reasons, if you want to protect and preserve those rights, then the choice is to go public. And that's super important. Also, people want their kids to have a thriving education. They want their schools to be joyful places where kids have all the resources they need and where educators feel valued and want to go to work because they know that they're valued by kids and by families and by communities, and that everybody feels welcome and safe in our buildings. And if we aren't holding the state accountable for meeting those obligations in our public schools, then we're doing something very wrong. And so we need to prioritize those priority needs before we fool around with throwing money away in programs that are wholly unaccountable to us.
All right, speed round. Kreitlow's giving me the high sign here. We got 4.5 minutes left, so short answers if we can, please. Heather, I'm going to start quickly with you. Again, rights of students. Students do have rights, quickly.
students do have rights. And if you are concerned, like many of us are, about all of the attacks that we're seeing, both at the state level, the federal level, sometimes at the school board level, not protecting the rights of LGBTQ plus students, not protecting the rights of immigrant kids and their families, not protecting the rights of educators to teach the truth in welcoming environments. These are all things that matter deeply up and down your entire ballot, from school board to the state superintendent race to the Supreme Court race. And also, if you're sick of raising taxes on yourself to pay for public schools to be open and thriving, then and you want to shut down this system of referendum, let's hold the state accountable for funding.
Julie, let's go quickly to you on this issue of immigration, because we could do a whole evening just on that. But very quickly, Eau Claire, we had Mike Johnson, the superintendent of Eau Claire Public Schools, on the show. He's been on Pat's show before, UpNorthNews Radio. Talk quickly, if you can, please, just why, again, a fair Wisconsin State Supreme Court could have an effect on these immigration issues and how they're handled in public education.
Well, immigration is, largely a federal issue, but schools and how schools operate and how schools manage those things are state and local issues. And so understanding, of course, that all kids, regardless of where they come from, when they're in our communities, have a right, as the United States Supreme Court has said, have a right to an education and have to be welcomed, valued, and taught. And so I think understanding that we have to exist in that particular situation. We have to help kids understand, and there are all kinds of heartbreaking stories right now about kids being afraid of what's going to happen when they're at school to their parents and a whole variety of things. So I think just understanding what school districts can do, but mostly how they can welcome all kids regardless of where they're from.
Representative Phelps, 1 minute, one more minute left after that. From a legislative standpoint, again, do you have goals? Do you see any hope of working with your Republican colleagues right now, or is this a go it alone and rely on a fair court?
Both, because there's a long-term battle that we can win if we build enough political power, which we do partly through the messages that we're sending in the Capitol. Just like I represent a competitive district, so do most of my Republican colleagues. And so, for example, the voucher issue, I think for the reasons Heather mentioned, it's no coincidence that the people pushing a Christian nationalist agenda are the ones supporting school privatization. The people in the rural communities that I represent, the public school families, are alarmed and horrified to learn that they are losing funds to private schools when there isn't even a private school in those communities. Yeah. I think my Republican colleagues have to answer for that, and if they don't do it in this session, if we're loud enough, they will eventually.
Peggy, 30 seconds. Sorry about that. From a teacher's standpoint, why is this race important to you?
Well, I hope that every voter in Wisconsin thinks about the partnership between them and their local school district in this election. I know that our students' future depends on impartial justices who will uphold the Constitution and keep our communities and our schools safe, and understand that importance for a great public education for every student in Wisconsin.
Representative Christian Phelps, Peggy Wirtz-Olsen, Heather DuBois Bourenane, and Julie Mead, thank you all for being here. We appreciate a big round of applause. We appreciate you all being here. Education is so important, and this race matters. Be a voter on April 1st. Stay tuned now. We're going to take a quick break for those listening across Civic Media on our live coverage here. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, and you're listening to the Civic Media Radio Network.